All right, we are now joined by a very, very special two-time recurring guest, friend of the podcast. It is Mickey Jannis. He's a current pitcher for I'm going to butcher this name because I haven't taken Spanish in many, many, many years, but Saraperos de Saltillo in the Mexican League?
Yeah, that was pretty close.
That's
Saraperos de
close.
Saltillo. So we just got to
Okay.
work on our Mexican accents, but yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
good.
maybe roll some of those R's. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Well, cool. Mickey Jannis has joined us on the podcast again. I'm really excited because Mickey was on a couple years ago. Lots happened since then. Yeah, it's always just good to catch up with him. He's one of the few knuckleball pitchers currently going out there, but there are some more guys coming into the fraternity of the knuckleball. So, Mickey, how are you, and how are things down there in Mexico?
Going good. I'm doing well. I'm grinding it out down here, but having a good time and enjoying the experience.
So, last time you were on, I think you were in independent ball, right?
Yeah, I think it was the year after my debut, and I was back in independent ball. I think that was 2022, I think.
I think so. I think it was summer
Yeah.
22.
Yeah.
What's take me through like the timeline of what's happened since then and how you ended up where you currently are?
Yeah, so I think 22, I finished the year in indie ball, and then I actually played 1 month down in Venezuela winter ball. So I got to experience that. That was quite the experience. But and then after that, just went back to the High Point Rockers last year, in independent ball again in the Atlantic League, and had a really good season. Probably like a finalist for pitcher of the year, and led the league in wins and had a really good season, and parlayed that into a job down here in Mexico. So yeah, that's pretty much what it's been. Just playing for those two teams. Gotten a lot of interest from teams overseas as well. So just I'm trying to put up some numbers and hopefully catch some eyes over there.
I like that. How's your Spanish between the Venezuelan winter ball and playing in Mexico now?
It's enough to get by. I mean, I don't really speak it. I probably understand a lot more of it than I can actually speak. But everybody's always like, I speak a little bit of Spanish, and then somebody starts speaking in Spanish, and you're like, well, that's too fast. I don't speak any Spanish. So just enough to like, you can talk to a cab driver, Uber driver, order food, talk to some teammates. Everybody kind of knows just enough to, they know just enough English. We know just enough Spanish to get the gist of the conversation when we do have it. But I mean, Mexico this year, they opened up their import rule to 20 imports. So they're actually kind of low on like, for the first time, like the Mexican players are like overshadowed, I guess, by the imports, because there used to be, I think, 8 to 10 imports, if I'm not mistaken. So, so this year there's a lot more Americans. There's a lot of Dominican guys, some Venezuelan guys, guys from all over the world, obviously. So it's kind of cool to see them expand a little bit, but yeah, so get guys from all over.
Is that 20 for the entire league, or is that 20 per, like, what is that
No,
for?
it's 20 per team.
Oh my God.
So yeah, yeah. So there's quite a few. I'm trying to think. I think we have like 12 Americans, 10 to 12 Americans alone on this team, or gringos as they call them. But yeah, yeah. So quite a few guys I've played with before, played again. So you kind of just run into guys that you just on every team. So it's pretty cool to see them down here too.
I was looking at that because I was looking at your team down there, and I saw like some very recognizable MLB guys, like Tommy Malone's there, right?
Yeah, Tommy Malone's on our team. Fernando Abad, Alex Colome started the season with us. We just played against Matt Adams, Bobby Bradley. Um, so you're running into guys on every team that have 5 to 6, 7, 8 years of MLB experience. And they're doing the same thing. They're enjoying the experience. Having a good time. And I think most of the guys, their goal is still to get back to Major League Baseball and things like that, or show off and go overseas, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, whatever we can do to make some good money.
I forgot Matt Adams was down there. I love that guy. He came on the pod around the same time you did last year or 2 years ago. I had a question based off that, was just like, how is being around so many like familiar faces around the game, how does that kind of help ease your transition? And what's kind of the vibe around some of these former MLB players that you're seeing down there? Is that like, what do you think the breakdown of guys that are like, they just want to get back to the big leagues versus the guys who are like, hey, you know what? I'm at the end of my career. I just kind of want to keep playing ball and have some fun.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of both. I mean, definitely having, some people who speak English help a lot, just being able to hang around guys and converse and whatever. That's what made Venezuela a little bit tougher for me because most of the guys really didn't speak any English. Um, there was probably 5 to 10 guys that did and spoke a little bit, so I could converse with those guys. But yeah, down here, I mean, having those guys around, it makes the transition a lot easier to hang around, be around the guys and stuff, being in the locker room. And then as far as guys just guys love competing. So I mean, a lot of these guys are gonna kind of do whatever they can to still compete, and the money is a little bit better here than in independent ball. So you're seeing a lot of guys who were like Frontier League, Atlantic League, American Association, pretty much any of those guys that had really good years down there were getting offers to play in Mexico because, again, the money's better and they expanded the import rule. So it just became available to them. And then on top of that, you got the minor leagues who are cutting back on more veteran players in the minor leagues. So then you're having that wave of guys come down to Mexico. So, I mean, you're getting some really good talent down here. And, a lot of guys are parlaying that into winter ball jobs. And, like I said, there's probably been 20 guys or so that have had contracts purchased, gone back to affiliated ball. I don't know how many have gotten back to the big leagues. I remember one was Sean Anderson. He made one start down here, got picked up by the Rangers, and then I think he had a start in the big leagues recently. But so it's possible, and again, that's kind of the end goal for everyone. That's the end goal for me. That's why I'm still playing. So, just hoping for that possibility of a door to open, and, so we'll kind of see what happens.
I like that. I've also interviewed Sean Anderson, or just all the guests of the pod are down there.
Yeah, I guess so.
He's a great dude, but that makes so much sense though, about just like I was talking to Brian about just like the number of jobs that have been lost in the minor leagues. And just like if the money's better, it's like closer playing in Mexico than it would to be, go across the world to play in Japan or Korea. It makes a lot of sense for guys to go south of the border and play some ball. I'm wondering, how does the game itself kind of compare to the game in America? What are some of the differences and maybe even some similarities you've seen so far?
I mean, again, like with the quality of players that are down here, you're looking at, a good matchup between two high quality teams is going to be a good AAA game. Obviously there's some teams that are worse, so you can kind of beat up on them, but I mean, you still have to show up to play every day. Like the last place team is going to beat the first place team if they don't show up that day. So, you still have to show up and play the game. And, like I said, I'd say most of the matchups are pretty good, high AA to AAA games. And then I'd say down here, like we play at a high elevation. We're playing at almost a mile high here in Saltillo. And we're probably like sixth highest. So there's 5 or 6 teams that are higher than us. Mexico City's like 7,500 feet, a couple others, and they're in the sixes. So you'd think that they play more for the 3-run home run, but there's been a lot more like small ball being played. So like, a lot of times, if it's the 5th inning and you got, the 6-7 hole guy up, like leadoff single, they're going to bunt him over to second. And I feel like that's such a rarity nowadays in America, where you're seeing like a sacrifice bunt to send the guy to second base. I feel like you're so much more. Most of the like sack bunts, I feel like, would either go to like second and third, like a leadoff double type of thing, if at all. So just small ball like that, hitting runs, squeezes. You kind of gotta go over your bunt defenses again, kind of thing. But yeah, that's been kind of the difference. You get the, like I said, I feel like the power power numbers for guys aren't as high. So I feel like that's why teams kind of rely on that small ball a little bit more. Even though we are playing at high elevation, you don't see guys hitting 40 home runs. Like I think our leader right now has maybe eight to 10. So not terrible, but you're seeing guys in the minor leagues and stuff that have close to 22 months in or something like that. So
yeah, definitely have to get the pitcher fielding practice out if you're gonna be seeing guys try to sack bunt from first to second. That's crazy.
Yeah, I know, right?
Have you had to make any like adjustments to the way you play besides the fielding, obviously? But like, is there anything else about the game down there that you've had to kind of adjust to? Maybe the quality of hitter, like things you can and can't do. Like, what have you personally had to adjust about your game?
For me, it's not so much just because I'm throwing a knuckleball, but I know a lot of guys down here because of the high elevation at most places. Your breaking pitches don't move as much. For me, like I'm still going to throw a knuckleball, but I've noticed that like we played in Tijuana, which is right outside San Diego, and that's basically sea level. And then we played, here and in Mexico City. And I felt like the difference between those two cities is like, for me, the knuckleball still dances, but the drastic movements that you get aren't as much, if that makes sense. So like if I'm getting like this much movement at Saltillo, I'm getting like this much movement at sea level. So it's just like little things like that. And I noticed that guys who throw like sweepers and sinkers, they don't move as much at elevation. So they're kind of relying on like more of a cutter and a slider type of thing. So your breaking balls aren't moving as much, your sliders aren't moving as much, but the sliders catch more for movement than like a sweeper does. So like sweepers aren't really a thing at elevation. So like once you play the lower level cities, you're able to bring back your sweeper and your sinkers and stuff like that. So that's been a huge adjustment for a lot of our pitching staff who haven't been down here before.
I'm glad you talk about the knuckleball because I had a bunch of questions off that. So I was doing some like research on this because just it's like the knuckleball is just like you don't see it that often. And I was reading like R.A. Dickey was talking about pitching in altitude with the knuckleball and just like the effect it had on it. So does it make it move more? Because I think the goal of it obviously is to like make it not move at all. So like how does altitude affect the fluttering knuckleball that you throw?
Like I said, I just felt like it doesn't move as much. Like as long as you're throwing it with no spin, it's going to have some sort of dance to it, but the dancing isn't as like drastic. Okay. So, I'd say like if I throw like a knuckleball that moves 10 inches arm side at elevation, it might move like 15 to 18 inches arm side, at sea level type of thing. So it's still going to dance, but what I tell people is I feel like there's not as many like swing and miss knuckleballs at elevation. So I'm getting more like weaker contact as opposed to like the swing and misses, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I've noticed more is that like I'm pitching to like, for me, it's a contact pitch anyways, but I'm pitching to even more contact at elevation just because of that. So I feel like command of it needs to be a little bit better where it needs to be more on the corners per se, as opposed to like, when I'm at sea level, I'm just like throw it down the middle and hopefully it lands in the strike zone because it's moving so much. So like I pitched in Tijuana. I remember having 4 walks and 3 1/3 innings, I think it was, or 3 2/3. And I think I had like 4 or 5 strikeouts. So I felt like the ball was moving a lot. It was like a swing and miss or out of the zone kind of thing. And then I pitched in Chihuahua the other day. Didn't have any walks, but I had a lot weaker contact in 4 innings. And I felt like I could fill up the zone a lot better just because the movement wasn't as bad. So everybody kind of knew that I was going to be in the zone.
So in all the years that you've been throwing this pitch, like, are you still learning new things about the way it moves? Like, can you ever fully say that you have this pitch mastered? Because I was reading, it was just like guys who throw the knuckleball for 20 years, they're still trying to figure it out, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you ever master the pitch. But, I mean, I definitely have a feel of, like, where I'm throwing it, locating it, and when I throw it to that location, I have an idea of, like, how it's going to move. Again, it's still going to have a mind of its own, especially when you throw it perfect with little to no spin. But, there's always something I learned, like, trying to take speed off of it. Like I feel like my slower knuckleball is a lot more effective down here too, just to kind of give like a change of pace. Because I'm throwing like consistently like 78 to 80 miles an hour for my knuckleball, and being able to change speeds with it when I throw it, 65 to 70 miles an hour, I feel like that has a lot better effect at high elevation here, just to keep them off balance.
Yeah, because how often are hitters seeing 60-something-mile-per-hour pitches? That's just like that never happens, I feel like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like the knuckleball is one of those pitches that like everybody kind of experiments with. Everybody that plays baseball is like, oh, I throw it in the backyard and it kind of moves a little bit. How often do guys come up to you and it's like, hey, Mickey, I got a knuckleball for you? And just versus like how many can like actually make it move the way it's supposed to?
I mean, 90% of my teammates and people I see are always like, hey, every time I throw one or they're playing catch, if I walk behind them, I finish playing catch and then I walk behind them and they're like, hey, Mickey, check this out. And I throw one. And then I'm just like, nope, that was terrible. Don't do that anymore. Give them my honest feedback. And sometimes they throw a good one and I'll be like, hey, you might have something there. Might want to give up hitting. Just giving them a hard time or whatever. But, a lot of guys for sure.
It's a cool like little community of guys that throw it, right? Because like so I was reading about the newest member, I feel like, of the knuckleball community. It's Alex Blandino from the Reds. Have you heard about this guy?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't talked to him personally, but the guy who works with him, that whole, I don't know if you saw that Knuckleball Academy that they
Yep.
MLB came out with. So I ran a camp with him back in 21, or 20, I think it was 21, in Vegas with him. I did a little knuckleball camp with him, and so we've kept in touch ever since then. And he was telling me about Blandino getting the opportunity to throw it for the Reds, and and he, the video I've seen of him, I mean, it's pretty good. I think always the issue with guys that are just starting, especially if you're on the older end, like it's just being able to command it and control the running game. Because again, you can throw one, you can go out tomorrow and throw one really good to anybody, and then you have to repeat that 100 times a game. Um, and then obviously you have to keep it in the zone. Then you have to control the running game and throw with people on base. So it's just a matter of understanding and learning how to do that. And I think the last time I talked to him about Blandino was that the Reds like him. He's throwing well, but he's not throwing enough strikes right now. So they're still letting him work and throw as much as they can back in the complex league, I think, is where I think that was about a month ago when I talked to him. And so he can definitely kill the spin on the pitch. So it's just a matter of learning to control it and to keep it in the strike zone.
It's also like a cool story. I feel like that in that Knuckleball Academy article you were talking about, it's like Blandino is just like throwing to the guy who and he recommended him to Charlie Huff, and Charlie Huff kind of gave him like the, hey, you might have something here.
Yeah.
Which I feel like it's just a cool like fraternity of like there's not a lot of guys that have thrown it, and like the ones who have, like I feel like they're really like accepting it. And like, can you just describe what the knuckleball community is like for people?
Yeah, I mean, me myself, I've had about 6 minor leaguers reach out to me this year, just asking about it. Like, hey, any tips? What can you help me with? Just because your normal pitching coach has no idea how to help you. So, for the most part, when I was coming up, I was just kind of on my own, doing it. So I was just trial and error, and a lot of times that's kind of what it is like, hey, like here's some tips that worked for me. Like send me some video of your game. Like I'll see if I can see anything. But here's some tips. Like if you want to try it, go ahead. Let me know how it works, because it's really just like you got to go repeat it and throw it and throw it and throw it and throw it. I mean, when I first started throwing it, I was at an elementary school brick wall throwing it 500 times a day, just like, how do I figure this thing out, And I felt like I always had a good one where I would like play catch, or I'd throw it in college summer ball or high school summer ball, and I'd rip it 15 times after every playing catch session, and I was still a conventional pitcher, but I still had that in my back pocket where I'm like, this is pretty good. But then it's like I went through the same thing of like, okay, now there's a hitter standing in, now there's a guy on first base, now there's a guy on third base, like how do I figure out how to do this. And you kind of just got to get past all that and just have confidence and just throw with conviction, because it's really what it is. I mean, you kind of saw it in my debut. You throw it down the middle and the guy strikes out, and then the next time you throw it down the middle of the same pitch and he hits it 400 feet, and then you're just like, well, that's just kind of how it is. Here it is again and again and again and again. I mean, there's no other pitch that you just throw, 90% of the time, 80% of the time, that, you're just kind of, and you're throwing it at the hitting speed too. So it's like, it's just such a rarity for people to throw it. I think that's what intrigues everybody by it. That's why everybody wants to do it, because you just don't see it every day.
For the guys that have thrown the knuckleball at such a high level, like the R.A. Dickies, like what did they do differently from the other knuckleballers that made them have so much more success?
I mean, I think it's just consistency, keeping it in the zone and taking spin off the ball at the same time. If you look at it, I would say that Tim Wakefield was probably the main guy who was able to do it, from what I've seen growing up. I mean, especially nowadays. I mean, you look at some of those old videos of Charlie Huff and Phil Niekro, like, I'm sure they threw great knuckleballs, but the strike zone was this big, it's like, well, geez, if the strike zone was that big right now, I don't know if I'd throw a ball, because I've been teaching myself to throw it in this tiny square this whole time, watching these guys in the old days have to throw it, and they're throwing it, the strike zone that big. But what R.A. Dickey did, what Tim Wakefield was able to do, Stephen Wright was an all-star throwing it. I mean, I think the harder you can throw it, you can have a little bit more rotation of it. But the slower you throw it, you got to have it with no spin, because, I mean, it's 60 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour what Wakefield was throwing. So he really had to be the one that had to throw with absolutely no spin, because if he throw with any rotation, I feel like it was just getting hit.
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about throwing the knuckleball? Because I feel like from the outsider's perspective, some guys might look at it as like a fountain of youth. Like, oh, this guy pitched until he was in his 40s. Like, I could do that. I want to play and make more money, that kind of stuff. Like, is that a part of some of these guys thinking that, like, hey, this knuckleball pitch might be something I want to try out?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gives you like second career. I mean, you can start throwing it at 35, as long as you can throw it for strikes and take spin off the ball. But I think the biggest thing is that, as far as like throwing it, I think people think that the catcher has to like miss them for it to be good. If the catcher doesn't drop it, it's not very good. But that's not the case. I mean, the catchers are professional athletes too. They figure out a way to catch it. They're good enough to figure it out. Yeah, if you throw a nasty one, it might hit them square in the chest or in the mask or something, but that's not going to happen every single pitch. And then I think the other thing is that you don't have to throw it perfectly with absolutely no spin every single time. You can have one rotation, or like you might throw one with 3 or 4 rotations that has, nasty movement. I mean, the one that Matt Waldron's throwing, like, a lot of them aren't even true knuckleballs. You're watching it rotate 3 or 4 or 5 times on the way to the plate, and guys are missing it. And now, is that because he throws it 45% of the time? I think it is what I was reading recently. Maybe that's why. He's still got a 90+ mile an hour fastball. He's got a really good sweeper. So maybe that's why it's more effective for him. But for me, I was throwing it 80% of the time, 85% of the time. I felt like if I'm throwing a ball that rotates 4 or 5 times on the way to the plate, like, it's probably going to get hit, because it's not as good as my other ones with no spin. But I have seen him, though, recently. The more he's thrown it, I feel like it's gotten so much better as the season's gone on. And I think that's the case with knuckleball pitchers, even myself. Like, I feel like I'm throwing so much better than I was at the beginning of this year even. So, I don't think you have to throw it perfect every single time, but, you just got to try to kill the spin as much as you can.
I'm so glad you brought up Matt Waldron, because he's actually having a lot of success this year in San Diego. I looked it up because I was going to ask you about that. He's throwing it 38% of the time, his knuckleball.
Yeah.
Where does that rank in terms of what traditional knuckleballers throw in a game? You said you're like 80, 85%. Are more guys on your end, or are more guys on the low end?
As far as I know, most guys are on my end. I'd say I don't really know the percentages back in the day, but I'd say Tom Candiotti probably threw it a little bit less than, say, like Charlie Huff and Phil Niekro. But I was always one of those guys where if it's nasty that day, like I'm gonna throw it every single pitch. And here it is, hit it. Like I'll tell you it's coming. Like good luck, But on other days, I might have to throw it like 65, 70% of the time, mix in some more fastballs or sliders just in case. I might, the catcher might come out after the first inning. Hey, it's rotating a little bit more, like, that type of stuff. Just to try to get the feel back. So it kind of depends on the day for most people, but I'd say as far as I know, like most knuckleballers are probably closer to the 70 to 90% range. I think when R.A. Dickey started, he was probably closer to 50% of the time. I was an indie ball starting to throw it, and I started out probably 30% of the time. Then I went up to 50. Then as you learn to throw it more and more, you start throwing it more and more. So, because I think it's an effective pitch that you can throw every single pitch if it's not spinning.
We interrupt this episode to bring you a word from the official sponsor of Not For Long Media and the Breaking Bats podcast, the original Fudge Kitchen. It is a staple of the Jersey Shore with 6 locations in Cape May, Wildwood, North Wildwood, Stone Harbor, and Ocean City. The original Fudge Kitchen makes all of their fudge in store, guaranteeing a delicious product, so stop by and let them know that Not For Long Media and Breaking Bats sent you. Check them out online at fudgekitchens.com as they are shipping fudge and sweet treats all across the country. Now back to the episode. Yeah, I was just fascinated by that because it's almost like, it's like a hybrid model of, because I like watching Matt Waldron pitch. He has a really good low 90s fastball. He's got a sinker. Like he can do some really like a high fastball. He strikes dudes out all the time. But do you think it takes is there like a mental thing where if you're like behind in the count, like to throw the knuckleball and when you're down 3-1, like I feel like that takes like some mental, some fortitude to be like, hey, you know what? I'm behind, but you know what? Here's the knuckler. I hope it's a strike. You know what I mean? Like, does that take some mental stuff?
Absolutely. Cause that's, another thing against the knuckleball is walks, and I remember Charlie Huff telling me, like, don't worry about the walks. You're going to walk people. Just make sure like the next guy after you walk, you get him out or like you're throwing your best ones in the zone, cause really you're trying to avoid a 3-run home run. Cause a lot of times you're going walk, and then you just got to avoid that 3-run home run that kind of kills everybody, to be honest. But I mean, if you're throwing bad knuckleballs, that makes it a little bit easier to hit. So, being able to throw it behind in the count was a huge change for me to make me more successful, because if you're getting behind the count and you're throwing, I'm throwing 88 to 90. If I'm throwing a 4-seam 90-mile-an-hour fastball where they can go, hey, every 3-1 pitch, this guy just throws a fastball, and they're like, all right, here we go, and I just remember one of the biggest things for me is just watching hitters with it too, seeing how they approach you. And when I was in AAA with the Orioles, we were playing the Durham Bulls, and Wander Franco was coming up, and I ended up going 3-0 to him. And I'm just watching him, and he's just taking, and he just looks at ball 1, ball 2, ball 3, and then it was 3-0. There's a runner on second base, and I'm looking at him, I just watch him, and he's all of a sudden 3-0, and he digs his spikes in the batter's box, and I'm this guy thinks he's about to get a 3-0 fastball, and there's zero chance of throwing a 3-0 fastball. I threw him a 3-0 knuckleball, and he swung out of his shoes and jammed himself and popped up to short. And it was just just instances like that where I'm if I'm not able to throw a 3-0 knuckleball for a strike, then it's first and second, then the next guy comes up going oh, well, he can't throw his knuckleball for a strike. I'm just going to look for something that's spinning. So just being able to do that when you're behind in the count, I think is a huge difference for knuckleball pitchers.
Yeah, and I was reading an article about Matt Waldron, and it's just I think he's just a couple years into his big league career, but when he's behind in the count, he drops his knuckleball usage in half or something. I feel like he just goes right to his other stuff. But yeah, that stuff's fascinating. Are there other mental things you had to get over from throwing the knuckleball? Because you were a traditional pitcher before that. What did you kind of have to change about the mental side of the game besides being behind in the count and throwing it when you started to throw the knuckleball?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably come up with a list of 15 things that I had to learn how to do, Another thing was throwing it for a first pitch strike, just to get ahead. Because again, if you're going up there as a knuckleball pitcher and you're well, he's never going to throw the knuckleball, you can just kind of sit on a fastball because guys don't want to hit your knuckleball. So that was like another major milestone that I hit. And just throwing it with guys on third base, throwing it, having confidence in your catcher to just catch it and keep it in front, being able to, control the running game. Like I said, all those little things that happen with guys on base, being able to throw it when a guy squares around a bunt, because visually that just kind of throws you off. You're not used to a guy squaring around a bunt. So like, you see a guy square around the bunt, and I just remember I used to like, boom, and just spike it straight in the ground, So like little things like that where, it's just a bunch of little things like that just, just kind of had to get over that hump. And that's where the same thing is like, if you give up a home run, the next pitch, like trying to get strike one again and having confidence in it of going like, well, I know I just gave up a home run, but here it is again, here it is again, here it is again,
Is there a lot of loud contact when guys square up a knuckleball that you don't really get a good one?
Most of the time I kind of know like out of the hand where I'm like, oh, that one didn't feel good, or, something like that, where you're like, oh, please don't swing, but yeah, I mean, if you don't throw a good one, it's a BP fastball, really, is what it is. It's 75 to 80 miles an hour, right? Hopefully not right down the middle, but sometimes it is right down the middle, and it just, it doesn't dance, so it's just right in their bat path.
You mentioned the running game. What does that look like as a knuckleball pitcher? Like you mentioned having to control the running game. Are guys like, are they taking bigger leads, or like it's the fact you're throwing it slower? What does the run game look like as a knuckleballer?
Yeah, I mean, you really just have to mix up your timing at first base of when you're delivering the pitch. So, it's mixing up your holds where you come set, you hold for 1 second, one pitch, and then the next pitch you hold for 4 seconds and pitch, mixing in a slide step, a bigger leg kick. R.A. Dickey pretty much took the running game away because he just said, I'm slide stepping. So he was like, I'd say if you're a conventional pitcher, you try to be like a 1-2 to a 1-4 to the plate when delivering the pitch to give your catcher a chance to throw him out. I mean, I would say R.A. Dickey was probably close to a 1.0. That's how quick he was. He was just like, I'm going to be as quick as I can to the plate. He had a really good pickoff move, so a really good pickoff move helps. But again, I think it's just mixing up your timing because, again, you're throwing it 80% of the time. Even on the low end, if you throw it 60% of the time, you're still throwing it more often than you're not. So if you don't throw it one pitch, you're probably going to throw it the next pitch. So if you're the base runner at first base, you're like, I'm just going to take a chance that the catcher is going to have trouble catching it and transferring it. The catchers use the bigger glove, so it's harder to find the ball in it. You get a lot of the like transfers, like, man, I couldn't get it out. Little things like that, and it's not your fault. It's not really a catcher's fault either. It's just a different animal. So, just doing your best to give your catcher a chance to throw them out.
I never thought about that, but you're right. They do carry that. Like, how big is the knuckleball mitt compared to the normal catching mitt?
So think of like a first baseman's mitt mixed with a big softball catcher's mitt. It kind of has the smaller padding on the side. I would say catchers mostly use like a 33-inch or 34-inch at the most, which is like circumference of the catcher's mitt. And my catcher's mitt is like 36 to 38 inches around. So yeah, it's quite a big difference, and especially like not your traditional catcher's mitt where you have the thick padding. It has the smaller padding, so it has a bigger web. So with the bigger web, that's where the ball just kind of like rattles around a little bit more, especially if you don't catch it clean. Just makes it a little more difficult.
Is it hard finding guys to catch you?
Sometimes, but every team I'm on, I always have a guy that embraces it, and that kind of always turned into my personal catcher. There are some guys who are just like, nah, didn't really want any piece of it. They're like, I'll figure it out when I get in the game, or they didn't like catching me on the side, and they're like, they caught me pretty well in games or something like that. But I'm usually playing catch with a bullpen catcher every day instead of a pitcher. But I'll play catch with a pitcher as long as he's like, hey, I'll play catch with you. I'll take it, but then there's some days where it's like, he's like, all right, I can't handle it today. Like, I'm not catching your knuckleball. So then I have to get the bullpen catcher to come over. But yeah, there's always guys that embrace it, and honestly, you don't really have a choice once you get in the game. So it's like you're gonna have to figure it out.
I went and rewatched the King of Juco video you did, where he had no idea how to catch it, and it was like hitting him in the arm. Does that happen when guys catch you for the first time? They're like, "What the hell do I do with this thing?"
Yeah. I've gotten some guys pretty good. So it just comes with the territory. Catchers get hit all the time. There's a lot of like foul tips too that they get like off their knees and their toes and shoulders just because of the late movement and the missed barrels. So get a lot of those. But my catcher down here is Juan Ceteno actually, and he actually caught R.A. Dickey and Stephen Wright, and now he's caught me. So I thought that was like kind of cool that he's caught like the three of the most recent knuckleball pitchers throughout his career. So, and he's embraced it just because he's done it before. So, but I remember when I first got down here and he was down here and he's just like, all right, I gotta remember what to do, but I got this, So, that gives you some confidence of just like, all right, I can let it rip and, he'll be all right.
I like that. Yeah, it's like riding a bike. Also, what are the odds that he is there now and he caught all of these other guys? I mean, it's like that's like a 1 in a million catcher you have.
I know, right? I mean, I didn't even know him because I knew Josh Tolley caught R.A. Dickey most of the time, but he was like, oh yeah, I came up with when R.A. Dickey signed with the Mets and was up there with him, and then he was up there with Stephen Wright with the Red Sox. So it's kind of crazy to even think of that he was with 3 different knuckleball pitchers throughout his career.
Who was Wakefield's guy? Was that Mirabelli?
Doug Mirabelli. And they did like a 30 for 30 on him because he wasn't with the team anymore. And they were basically like, we need you back. And they like flew him in just like you're catching, game starts in 20 minutes. Like you're in the game kind of thing, just because they're like, we need you, and that's how it is. I mean, I'm pretty sure Josh Tolley went over to the Blue Jays with R.A. Dickey when he got traded just because they were comfortable together. And that's, Josh Tolley probably got 5 or 6 years in the big leagues because of it, Not saying he couldn't have got 6 years, but I mean, you get comfortable with one pitcher, you're going to stick with him for, Greg Maddux had his personal catcher. There's Garrett Cole, I think, had Higashioka like last year, 2 years ago, I think. So it's like, if you're comfortable and you're really good, like they're going to find the catcher there. All right, you're my guy. So, it's how it is.
It's not a bad way to make a living being somebody's personal catcher. Yeah. Well, I had a question off of that. Like, how important is the pitcher-catcher relationship? Not just talking about like knuckleball pitchers and catchers, but just like in general. Because like, did you play with Adley in Norfolk in 21?
I did a little bit at the end. I threw to him in spring training and stuff like that. So, but yeah, he's awesome. Yeah.
That was my question, just because like there's like a debate online. It's like who should the Orioles keep long term, and everybody's like, well, Adley handles the staff really well, and it's just like, how important is having a catcher that works so well with the pitching staff and like the value that he provides, not just with his bat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always say like if you can catch a great game, hold runners, throw some guys out. Like I don't care if you hit 0, like you're gonna be back there every time for us, So I think just being able to call a game, manage the pitching staff, like that's just huge in today's game, especially with all the scouting reports. Like, just reduces thinking on the mound for a pitcher. Like, even for me, like again, you're going to put the same signal down 85% of the time, but being able to mix in a fastball at the right times, or even the slower knuckleball that I throw probably 5% of the time, like being able to mix those in at the right times is just huge, because then I don't have to shake off, then I don't even have to think about it and just go like, oh, okay, he thinks it's a good time for fastball, and it usually works. So it's like, here it is, and just same thing for any pitcher, you're like, hey, this is how I like to work. Like, let's do it. And then it's like, every time he's in there, like, it's going to be how it is, and then sometimes you get catchers who just like, don't care as much. And you're like, he's like, comes out to the mound when you come in the game, and you're like, hey, what do you throw again? And you're like, dude, this is the 5th time you've caught me. Like, how do you not remember? It's just like, you do have some of those catchers sometimes. I haven't run across too many of them, but it's part of the game. Sometimes they just, doing their own thing, so they kind of forget or whatever. But being able to handle a pitching staff is huge.
Have you ever encountered catchers that like were backups but thought they deserved to be the starter? And is there ever like resentment in the catching core of just like playing time? Because I feel like that's a big thing about who gets what share of these games caught. And is there ever any like bad blood between those guys?
I mean, not so much. I think it's not like they can control like I wouldn't say there's bad blood between the catchers. It's more of just like coaching staff and just kind of like understanding like your role. And even if I mean, that goes on in every position too. Like, why is this guy starting over me? I think I should be in the starting rotation. Why, that type of stuff, but it's just like, can't really control that. They put the lineup together. You just got to go out every time you get the opportunity and do your job, no matter how you feel about it.
It's also just very funny. Yeah. Just like if the catcher doesn't know what you throw and just having to run through the signs 10 times, that must be awesome in the middle of a game.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'm like, I throw the hard knuckleball so much, which is 2 for me. And then the slow knuckleball is 4, and I'll shake off 2. And then it goes fastball in, now fastball away, slider. And then it's like, oh yeah, slow knuckleball. Like, and that usually happens like maybe the first or second time they catch me, and then they're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And then they put it down. But it's like, you're also trying to get a feel for the pitcher and know what he wants to throw on certain counts and things like that. So.
We had Dan Straley on recently, and there was a video that went viral a while ago where he shook off his catcher 9 times in a row. Have you ever had anything similar where you're just like, no?
Yeah, I remember one of the most recent games. I think I shook off 4 or 5 times. Yeah, I mean, I shook off every pitch to the slow knuckleball, and then it was like, oh yeah, I think that was the first time a catcher caught me though down here. I threw to a catcher for the first time 2 games ago. And he never caught me before, so it was like, nope. Ah, there you go.
There it is.
Right. Yeah. But sometimes I do that too to mess with a hitter where they put down the hard knuckleball first, which is the pitch I want, but I just want to get the hitter thinking like maybe it's 1-2 and he fouled off 2 in a row, and I'm like, all right, let's just shake off to the hard knuckleball again just to get him going. Like, how many pitches does this knuckleball pitcher have? He's thrown me 1 pitch and he shook off 6 times. It's just like, just to kind of keep them on their toes and get them thinking. And then most of the time they end up calling time after that, but it's still just like, all right, what's going on here? What's this guy throwing?
I like that. Little mind games. You should, yeah. So other than them calling time because you're taking too long, have you found that it's a successful thing?
Yeah, I definitely do. Again, putting the same sign down, putting the same sign down 80% of the time, that I tell the catcher, like, hey, let's mix in some fake shakes. So before he puts the sign down, he just shakes his head. And you'll probably notice it in big league games where they do that too, where they're just like, hey, let's just mess them up, shake off. And then they go back to the hard knuckleball. And then it's just like, a lot of times I do that, 2-0 to hitters where I throw 2 knuckleballs for balls. And then they give me like a fake shake thinking that, like, oh, he doesn't want the knuckleball, and then maybe he wants a fastball, and then I'm still throwing a 2-0 knuckleball. So I've had success with that. And then same thing like 0-2, where it's like throwing some fake shakes, and then it's like, all right, he's not throwing a knuckleball 0-2, like he's probably going fastball up or something like that, and it's still ends up being a knuckleball. So I think it throws him off still. The catcher's just sitting back there, and he's just like, it's just so quick with his helmet or something like that, where it's like, oh, that's what that means, where it's like something a pitcher would notice, but I don't even know if the position guys notice that stuff, but
next time I watch a game, I'm going to keep an eye out for that, because now I'm going to be locked in.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to hit on was just like the evolution of the game and the time that you've been in it. So like you were drafted in 2010. I feel like there's been different phases of the game, especially for pitchers, because like in different fads, like I feel like right now it's the sweeper. Everybody wants their pitchers to throw the sweeper. What have you kind of noticed about the game and how it's evolved in your time?
Well, I think when I was drafted, I was throwing an average major league fastball, and now I'm throwing about 5 miles an hour slower than a major league fastball. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing, is just the freak of the athletes that have come around nowadays, that everybody's throwing 90, 95 plus. And, you come around a guy and he's throwing 90 miles an hour, and it's like they don't even get a sniff anymore. But yeah, I mean, I feel like every few years, like there's a new pitch that everybody kind of loves. I mean, when Rivera was having so much success, it was like the cutter was coming up, and then I started even throwing the cutter in college, and that really helped me against left-handed hitters because I struggled. I was like a sinker slider guy and had an okay changeup. And then my senior year, I started throwing a cutter and I started throwing a better changeup. Um, and I think that's what helped me get drafted was those two pitches. Made a huge difference. And then, like you said, the sweeper the last few years, I feel like the splitter has also been like another pitch. And I feel like everybody's got different variations of it. You hear of the splinker, whatever. Now you got that Estrada guy's throwing the chitter or whatever he calls it. Where he's like a changeup splitter slide. It's like so I feel like it's just like guys are making up things just to figure out a way to keep them off their fastball because it don't matter if you're throwing 103. If you're throwing 103 every single time and it's straight and it's first strike, like eventually they're going to hit it. But you can throw 103 and then you're throwing like a little 95 splinker thing that looks the same. That that's kind of all you need.
Yeah, you mentioned that on Paul Skeen's day. He had another great outing. Surprise, surprise. Yeah. 103, but with a splinker. Just also might just be fun to say. I feel like everybody wants these guys to rip these sweepers, though. This has been a crazy. We talk to guys that's just like organizations are just pounding guys to be like, you have to throw the sweeper. We need like way more like movement across the plate. Like, have you like in turn, like, have you tried to throw a sweeper?
I've messed with it like a couple bullpens, but I probably had one or two bullpens where I threw it like 5 times in a row, but it was just couldn't like get enough horizontal movement on it because it's really I think it's like you're trying to keep the vert but keep the horizontal because you don't want like the slider breaks down a little bit, so you don't want it to have as much depth. So I think I was still throwing it and it was just having too much depth where it was kind of similar to my slider. And then I wasn't getting enough horizontal on it. So but also that's something that I run into trouble with if I throw like too many sliders or cutters one day. Like a lot of it's just like supinating or whatever, turning it over. So then that kind of meshes into my knuckleball where it's like your knuckleball, you're trying to stay behind it and stay through it. If I start throwing too many of these pitches, then it's like the knuckleball kind of starts just turning a little bit for me. So just something I try to avoid, but sometimes you need to throw a little bit more sliders on certain days.
Yeah, I wonder how Matt Waldron does it if he throws all these other pitches. Like, how does his wrist stay like true to form for a knuckleball, but then he also is ripping these other ones?
Yeah. Something that Waldron does like exceptionally with the knuckleball is that he always gets forward spin on it. Like I've never seen him throw one with backspin at all. And that was one of my issues I went through for a while where I was getting like backspin. So I was like staying too much behind it. So the ball was kind of coming out and it was coming out this way. So it was like staying flat and on plane. Whereas Waldron throws it top spin and it catches that way. So you get that a little bit of tumble effect and it's more of like a 12-6, so it goes down a little bit. So you get kind of two planes. But if you get the backspin, it's just like a dead fastball.
I think I was reading about this. Yeah, because you want it because the natural when you throw it, the air or something's going to be moving the other way or something. So it's like that's why you want it to go forward, not back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you kill the spin and it doesn't rotate at all, like a little bit of backspin doesn't hurt. But if it rotates 2 or 3 times, backspin, then it just kind of sits on plane and it's just sitting right there. But if you get 2 or 3 rotations forward, you'll get a little bit of drop. So it just kind of weird like that.
Sounds like there's a lot of math involved with this pitch.
I mean, I'm not thinking of any math equations when I'm throwing it, but I'm sure if you had to break it down into why it actually moves and stuff like that, I'm sure that's why some kind of math equations.
Yeah, you got to get like some like physics in there, and you got to take into account like the humidity and the density. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things that like
absolutely.
There's a lot that goes into this pitch, man. It's a crazy thing that you're able to do with a baseball. And you've been
I think that's why nobody throws it because they just, again, you can't track it on a TrackMan. You don't throw it with the same movement all the time. You got all these things with scouting reports now with hot and cold zones, and your fastballs here, sliders here, curveballs here, whatever. You think of back to math class, the graph, and you pull up the knuckleball and it's a scatter plot. There's one here, there's one here, there's one here, one here, one here. There's one all over the place. So it's like you don't know. Like you could throw two in the same spot. One gets hit for a home run. One is a swing and miss, and the guy looks stupid on it. So it's like, you just don't know why it does that, but it's just how the pitch is.
And you said no pitching coach, like a traditional pitching coach, is ever able to be like, hey, let's sit down and talk about this, right? Because there's just not that many of you.
Yeah, I mean, there's not too many that know how to do it. There's always some guys that might be like, oh yeah, I fiddled with it a little bit when I was like in AA and was like on my way out or something. But for me, it's always just been like, make sure my mechanics are in order so I can repeat my delivery, so I can repeat the pitch. Because if you can't repeat the delivery, then you're not going to be able to take spin off the ball consistently. So just being able to repeat your mechanics. And again, I think that goes back to what you were talking about earlier about what some of those knuckleballers do so much better than the rest is R.A. Dickey, Tim Wakefield, Stephen Wright, even Matt Waldron. I mean, you're watching his mechanics. They're almost perfectly repeated every single time. So I think that's one of the biggest issues for knuckleball pitchers, especially when they're first starting, is just being able to repeat your mechanics and fill up the zone. I mean, you're looking at Matt Waldron. Every time he pitches, he's throwing 90 pitches and he's throwing 65 to 70 strikes. Like, he doesn't walk batters. He just pounds the strike zone with everything he's got. So, that just makes, being ahead in the count most of the time, and you can expand the zone with, I mean, you're seeing some of his knuckleballs that he throws, they're like 22 horizontal movement, arm side, and the guy's swinging at it because it's like it starts out right down the middle and everything he throws is, over the plate. So then it does its thing, and, it's just hard to make a decision that fast for hitters.
Matt Waldron might take. Remember when you had last time? It's like you're the MLB The Show character GOAT, just because like everybody likes to throw the knuckleball. Matt Waldron's character on the show is probably taking some of that mantle from you.
Oh yeah, go to MLB.com or go to MLB on Instagram, and every single post that they make is like, go look at the comments, and it'll be like Matt Waldron, MLB The Show hero, and all this stuff. So you'll get a kick out of it because it's on there every single time, because I notice that now. So it's funny.
I guess my last question is, so have you seen the momentum of, we've talked about all these like position players getting opportunities. We talked about Matt Waldron a ton, getting opportunities, throwing the knuckleball. Have you seen over the years when you've been doing this, like, has there been like an incremental growth in the like number of organizations that are willing to take a chance on some of these guys?
Not really.
Really?
I think it just kind of comes up certain times. There's certain people who believe in it. I know the Blue Jays are an organization, the Mets, obviously, the Orioles had a guy that, that was one of the things that the scout said when he signed me, was like, there's someone in our organization who loves the knuckleball. So, I feel like that's what it takes. And same thing with the Padres. They had a assistant GM or general manager, I think, that saw Matt Waldron throw it and basically said, like, keep throwing that, you never know when you'll need it or whatever. Told him to start throwing it more and more, and look where he's at now. I mean, he's one of the hottest pitchers in baseball right now, which is kind of crazy, because if you look at the first month of the season, he's kind of struggling. Like, he was throwing okay, but like they weren't winning his starts. He was throwing like 5 innings, and then all of a sudden he caught fire, and now everybody's like, oh my God, he's so good. And I was like, well, yeah, you guys gave him like 4 games, and they were calling for him to get sent down because the Padres were struggling. He was kind of struggling, and then he kind of turned it around, and he's throwing the heck out of the ball right now. He's going 7 innings every start. He's 1 walk, 3 hits, 1 run. I mean, that's, you catch fire with that pitch, and you can pitch a long time.
I think he struck out 10 Braves or something like not that long ago. Yeah, and he's
doing it against good teams. Like, he pitched against the Dodgers, he pitched against the Braves. Like, he's doing it against good teams.
It's fun to watch. It's just cool to see. We're seeing, we talk about just passing the torch or carrying the torch of just like, we gotta keep this pitch alive in Major League Baseball. I feel like there's a long period where I think you might have had the last one in the major leagues for 3 years or something. Like,
yeah, it was almost 2 years to the day, I think, after my debut, where Waldron got called up, which is kind of crazy to think. That was almost perfectly 2 years to the day. But yeah, he made his debut like middle of last season, and I think he was kind of like bullpen starter kind of thing. And then this year he pitched really well in spring training, earned that starting rotation, and he's took off with it.
Love that. Matt Waldron fan club over here. Yeah, definitely big fans of his. I'm a big fan of yours, Mickey, because you're the man. You always come on. I feel like I learn something new about pitching and the knuckleball every time you come on. It's very insightful stuff. Best of luck down there in the Mexican League and continued success, dude. It's great to see you again.
All right. Yeah. Thanks again for having me on anytime.